Ahoy there folks, I'm Captain Benzie and welcome to another video for EVE Echoes. And yes, I do mean EVE Echoes. In today's video, I want to talk to you all about the concept of ammunition, a system in EVE Online that I think would be really beneficial to bring across to EVE Echoes in one way, shape or form. Ammunition to me is a massive benefit to EVE Echoes. I think if we brought this across, it would be a really good thing for the game, both for combat pilots and for industrialists, and we'll talk about why in this video. Now, I do also understand that talking about ammunition gets some people a little bit riled up. They seem to be against the concept of it without necessarily understanding why. Now, there are some valid concerns, definitely, and we'll be addressing that in this video as well. So basically, the order of play, I suppose, for this video is going to be talking about ammunition in EVE Online, what it is and how it works, talking about why this would be beneficial to combat pilots and why it would be beneficial to industrialists. Then we'll look at some of the concerns and some of the downsides, some of the problems that could arise by bringing this across to EVE Echoes, and then we'll talk about how we could then handle those. So looking at like some of the negatives regarding the ammunition system and how to avoid those and make it fit just that little bit better in EVE Echoes and the system that we have over there. Now, if you do enjoy this video, please let me know by hitting like on it, subscribe to the channel for all things EVE Online and EVE Echoes, and let me know in the comment section down below what kind of content you'd like to see me make in future. If you do want to go the extra mile to help support this channel, you can come find us on Patreon. You can pledge as little as £1 a month just there to support this channel and keep me doing what I'm doing, and at certain tiers you'll get some really cool benefits like exclusive merchandise and getting your name in the credits at the end of the video. On the subject of merchandise, there is also our Redbubble merchandise store if you want to check that out, links in the description down below. Finally, don't forget that every week I give away three people 1 month of Combo Omega, so make sure you've watched my video and understand how that works so that you're on my Discord and commenting in YouTube, and wow, that's a lot of information to get into one opening. So with all that said and done then, let's talk about ammunition. Now, of course, for me, ammunition comes primarily from the projectile turrets, cannons, as we know them in EVE Echoes. Of course, this does work for all types of weapons. You have ammunition for cannons, for railguns, for missiles, and even for lasers as well, although that one does work differently, and we will touch on that in just a moment. So I'm going to open up my inventory here, and we're going to go into the actual ship hangar, there we go, into the hold of this ship, and you can see I've got some different ammunition here. Now, I think the simplest way to look at ammunition in EVE Online is regarding missiles. Now, in EVE Echoes, missiles do a 25% spread of damage. It means that of their full damage profile, 25% of it is electromagnetic, 25% of it is thermal, 25% is kinetic, and 25% is explosive. That is not the case in EVE Online. Here you can see I have two types of light missile, a Mjolnir light missile and a Nova light missile. If we were to open these up in show info and look at their damage profile, you can see that the Nova does exclusively explosive damage with nothing in the other three types. I can't count. And if I go into the Mjolnir, surprise surprise, something named after Thor's hammer, would do electromagnetic damage, yet nothing in thermal, kinetic or explosive. And that is true across the board. You get Mjolnir, you get Nova, you get Scourge, and I can never remember the name of the fourth one. These are ultimately the types of missiles that you use in EVE Online. You load these into your weapon, into your launcher, and then you launch them against the targets. And there'll be usually a bunch of these loaded in one go. Sometimes it's 10, 20, 50, depends on the type of weapon, how much ammunition gets loaded in one go, and it'll fire one of these each time it cycles. When it runs out of ammunition, it has usually a 10-second cooldown while it reloads everything and starts firing again. Now, you might be thinking, hang on, Benzie, what you've just said is categorically worse than what we have in EVE Echoes. And yeah, we'll get to that in just a moment. As I said, I'm talking about how this works first of all. Now, under the description as well, you sometimes get some differences here. And we'll have a look at this in regards now to projectile ammunition cannon ammo. Now, carbonized lead and titanium sabo are the two that I tend to use a fair amount here. So let's look at titanium sabo first of all. Go show info. Now, the first thing you'll notice here is that we have a 20% increased tracking tracking speed for fitting this ammo. This is where I talk about how ammunition can be really beneficial to combat pilots. Missiles, to me, it's nice that you can just pick a missile depending on what you're going up against. If you want to go up against something that is heavily shield tanked, you can load in Mjolnir missiles and just go crazy dealing electromagnetic damage, whereas if you're going up against something that's armor tanked, you can go into explosive damage with your Nova missiles and go down that route. Here with ammunition, things are a little bit more, rather than missiles on like projectile ammunition, things are a bit more complex. Here you can see titanium sabot, 20% increased tracking speed, and if we look at its attributes are primarily here 6 kinetic damage and 2 explosive damage, and that looks really low. It's because numbers just generally are smaller in EVE Online anyway. Your ships will have less HP, less DPS, but it kind of balances its own way. The kind of point I'm getting here, though, is titanium sabot does 6 hit points of kinetic, 2 hit points of explosive. It has its bonus to tracking speed, as we saw here in its description, and under some of its other attributes you can see different bits and pieces going on here as well. If we compare that, so let's go into right click on this, and somewhere in here is the add to compare. There we are. Oh, I'm so out of contact sometimes on these. And then compare again, compared to carbonized lead. And if we have a look at these two side by side, we can pick some of their statistics down here. So kinetic damage, explosive damage, thermal damage, electromagnetic damage, different range bonuses, tracking bonuses. Used with launcher, we have base armor damage, base shield damage. Let's have a look at some of those. There we go. Charge size will just be small and things like that. So now we can actually have a look at these two side by side. So carbonized lead compared to titanium sabot. The charge size of both of these is small. You may have noticed if I go back into my inventory, there we are, that I've got carbonized lead M here and carbonized lead S. Now obviously that's small cannons and medium cannons, and there's also carbonized lead at large size. Anyway, let's have a look. So base shield damage 2.8 here on the carbonized lead, 4.4 on titanium sabot, base armor damage 3.9 and 6.3. So you can see here the titanium sabot does more damage compared to the carbonized lead at least. And you can see how that damage spread works here. Electromagnetic, neither of them. Both of these are explosive and kinetic with no thermal. Now the differences here are simply this. You can see here that the titanium sabot has that 25% increase to tracking speed, whereas the carbonized lead gets a 5% increase, and then we have a 60% increase to the range bonus on the carbonized lead instead. So if we close that down now and just have a look at the carbonized lead directly, we should see under description, there it is, 5% increased tracking speed, 60% increased optimal range. So you can kind of get an idea of what this is doing then. Carbonized lead is going to work really well in something that is using artillery or strike cannons because it's giving them additional optimal range to work with and a little bit of increased tracking speed just to make sure that you can keep your ship moving and still hit targets. And there are completely different variants of this as well. Like if I look at EMP, you see that EMP actually reduces my optimal range. So if I'm using something like autocannons that have, say, a 5 kilometer optimal, they're now at 2.5 kilometer optimal. That's crazy, right? Why would you do that? Well, because in addition to sort of the basic, like we've seen here of kinetic and explosive, we've got a whole load of electromagnetic damage. That's right, cannons doing electromagnetic damage, but at the cost of some of their range. Now, if you're using a brawler that is using something like autocannons, that you're primarily using the optimal range anyway, the fall-off range, this isn't a huge reduction. Losing 2 kilometers of your optimal range doesn't do all of that much, and you might find that against a shield-tanked foe, that additional electromagnetic damage is absolutely massive. And this goes across as well. I've got a Fusion S here just to showcase. This is massively on the explosive damage here. You can see this has a range bonus of -50 as well. So again, it's just pumping everything it has into explosive damage at the cost of range. And we have phased plasma, which does kind of the same thing, but with thermal damage. There's also one, I can't remember off the top of my head, that does it for kinetic damage, reduces the range and changes the type. In addition to this as well, you do also get what is referred to as Tech 2 ammo, things like Tremor and Quake, Barrage and Hail, which are kind of much more extreme variants of this that have a bigger benefit but a bigger negative as well. And we won't go into that into the process of this video because hopefully that has already explained here what I really like about ammunition. This means that, for example, if you're going for a brawler and you want to just do heavy damage in one way or another, then things like the EMP, Fusion S, and Phased Plasma are going to be really beneficial to you. You lose a little bit of optimal range, but considering your optimal range is so tiny anyway, even slashing it in half doesn't actually do all that much in effect. The increase of damage inside your fall-off range is going to be massively beneficial for a brawler. You wouldn't really want to put these into something like artillery or strike cannons though, because suddenly going from a 16km optimal range down to an 8km is a big difference. On the other hand, things like the titanium sabot and the carbonized lead, you get those bonuses to different things, like the carbonized lead having that bonus to the optimal range, making it longer firing and a little bit of extra tracking speed, but it's not quite as sort of high DPS as something like the titanium sabot, which still gives a bit of a bonus to range, so a bit of a bonus to tracking speed, whilst not giving the bonus to range, but having a bit higher of damage profile. Now, this is all about versatility. This means that you could actually sit there and build a ship that, for example, using Eve Echo's stats here, you could have a slasher that you're looking at how to, use this with strike cannons, and you want to just have a bit more optimal range because you're flying around too much of an optimal range, you're losing some of your damage. You go for something like your carbonized lead or your titanium sabot, and you can have better tracking at those distances, or better optimal range and tracking in regards to carbonized lead. It allows you to actually move a little bit further outside of web range and still get that bonus. On the other hand, if you then decided to fit that slasher with something like autocannons, you can put on something like EMP or Fusion S or Phased Plasma in order to just deal more damage right up close if you're going to be basically orbiting at 0. It's build versatility. It means that your ship can be sort of min-maxed a little bit more in different ways, kind of like I thought was going to be happening with things like nanocores, but this is a much more positive and negative. You get bonuses to one things, but you get negatives to others. This allows you to look at your ship. A common one is, for example, the succubus. You could give it an extra type of ammunition to allow it to just go a little bit further optimal range so that it can orbit at, say, 17 kilometers and still be in optimal. That puts it outside of web range whilst it's using its optimal with beam lasers, for example. Now, ultimately, the downsides here of ammunition come in that people don't like the fact that you have to fill up your hangar with all of this stuff. Yes, you have to buy this stuff off the market or make it yourself. You have to put it inside your ship. There's no such thing as an ammo, like an ammo hangar here or something. It's not like, like having a different tank inside your ship. It just goes in your cargo. It just goes in your cargo, which means you do have some of your cargo space taken up by ammunition. Now, to me, that's not a huge issue. Like, ultimately, ammunition doesn't take up necessarily that much space. Obviously, the bigger sizes take up more than the smaller sizes, and it just means you have this kind of decision to make. Do I undock with a full 3,000 titanium sabot, or do I take 1,500? Do I really need 5,100 phased plasma in my cargo? I mean, here you can see this is all inside a Thrasher. I've got all of this inside a Thrasher, and that's how much of the cargo I've actually taken up, so it's really not that much of a big deal. Some people don't like the fact that you have to reload after a period of time, that you're sitting there in combat and firing away, and then you run out of ammunition. You have to right click, or just it'll do it automatically by standard settings. You have like a 10-second period where all of your cannons reload, you put a whole load of new charges in, but this does actually give some versatility to the weapon systems as well. Like the Thrasher that I'm using, there are different types of strike cannons that you can use here, obviously called artillery here. You've got like the 250mm light artillery cannon 2, or the 280mm artillery cannons. Now, the difference between those is the artillery cannons have the 280 have obviously a better damage profile. They've got slightly better range, slightly better tracking, and slightly higher damage. So why do I use 250 rather than 280? And it's because you can see here it's got 40 titanium sabot loaded, whereas the 280 can only load 20 at a time. So after 20 shots, I have to reload. And that's a kind of consideration that you can make. You can also, this is something I want for another video as well, I would love to not just have, oh look, it's a strike cannon, like a Mark 9 strike cannon, or a Jolt strike cannon, or a criminal strike cannon, or a C-type strike cannon, but having different types of strike cannons, just that have slightly different stats. One of them might have better tracking and slightly different optimal, that kind of thing, but let's not go into that into the purposes of this video. Now, the downside of this as well is that people say, what happens if I run out of ammunition? Yeah, if I were to dump all of this ammunition into my standard item hanger, undock and go on a mission, I'm going to be in for a bad time because my guns have no ammo, and what happens when you try to shoot at someone when your guns aren't loaded? Nothing. That's right, exactly. Nothing happens, and some people don't like that you have it's an extra thing to keep track of and keep on top of. Now, ultimately, we will come to addressing this in just a moment, but before we do, I want to talk about how laser ammunition, in inverted commas, works, because it's not really called ammunition for lasers. These are called focusing crystals, or frequency crystals, rather. Ultimately, what these do is slightly different. Let's minimize that for a moment. The basic premise here is still the same. Here you can see frequency crystal for infrared M. This is a medium laser frequency crystal. This would give you a 20% increased optimal range and a 35% reduced capacitor need. So you're getting a better range and using less capacitor per shot. It's still entirely here into your electromagnetic and your thermal. You can see it's a little bit lower than perhaps it would be, but the benefits here are that additional range and additional capacitor need. Ultimately, you get different versions of this as well, things that will increase range, but also increase capacitor, things that use more electromagnetic and thermal, higher damage, but at reduced ranges because of the higher intensities and stuff like that. Looks pretty similar at the surface level to how the projectile ammunition worked. The difference is that this does not have a number attached to it. If we go back to the inventory, you'll see I've only got one of these, whereas like the missiles and the projectile ammo, I'm carrying at least 100 of these. This, you would only need one. You basically load that into a laser and it will stay in there for up to 1,000 cycles. As it gets closer to 1,000, it is more and more likely to crack. Once it is cracked, it will need replacing. And again, you can replace it in combat. So if it cracks, you basically replace it mid-combat and you reload it that way. This is a way for lasers to be balanced a little bit differently to things like your railguns and your cannons and your missiles, because they don't need to reload as often, but when they do, it's a much bigger event because it's the cracked crystal and you need to completely resort this. And this ultimately is my concept for how things would actually work, possibly with Eve Echoes. Now, I'll be completely honest, I would be fine if they just gave us ammunition like this and just brought it straight across. I don't mind having to give up a little bit of my cargo space to keep ammo in there. I don't mind having to sort of remember, have I got ammo when I undock? I fly enough ships already that use fuel for things like scanning that I have to keep track of anyway. Same with anyone who's flying a Guardian. There are lots of different things out there that do still require, or a command ship, that do require you to have fuel in your hangar. And so you kind of have to keep track of these things anyway. I don't necessarily believe that in Eve Echoes what we should just baby each other and everyone holds hands because, it's another thing to keep track of. I don't want to have to keep track of things. That's not a good reason, in my opinion, to not add something. Because keeping track of ammo isn't hard. Like, you just check before you undock. Heck, when you undock, you can actually have a look at your ship itself. I mean, let's actually showcase this in action. Like, when you undock, you can look at your cannons at the bottom right here when it loads. There we are. And you can see, do they have numbers in? Yeah, they do. That means I've got the ammunition. Probably need to just check that I have enough of it, but you can also just change it. So if I wanted to change to carbonized lead, there you go. There's the reload cycle. Like we talked about before, it takes about 10 seconds to change the ammunition, which means if I'm caught in a fight and I go, oh, actually, in this fight, it would be better for me to be using the titanium sabot, I can go, right, okay, well, actually, let's change to titanium sabot. And this works really well in something like my Wolf, where I'll be carrying lots of different of the short-range ammos, like the EMP, the phased plasma, etc. That's actually why those were in the hangar here. Basically, I can find a target and then go, oh, that's a shield tanked target. Let me quickly load in my EMP, and off we go and try and blast that. Or we can go, oh, actually, that's an armor tanked target, so I'm going to go instead for the fusion one and go for the additional explosive damage to try and rip through that armor tank just a little bit faster. So that's the sort of the benefits of how it works, but for combat pilots, that build versatility. But what about for industrials? Because I did mention that industrials as well would have a big benefit from this. Well, that involves me basically pulling up the industry screen here and having a look at this. And of course, I'm about to dock and lose the black screen. There we go. So let's have a look at the industry screen here, because making ammunition is really beneficial for industrialists. You can see here the blueprint for Titanium Sabo S. This, in EVE Echoes, blueprints are used once and then they're gone. In EVE Online, you can use it, in this case, up to 9,000 times. Then you can see it will make 100 of the ammunition using a total of 50 tritanium, or 58, I can't probably read that, 64 pyrite, and 1 mexilon. That's how we make this particular ammo, and we can look at all the different types of ammo and see how they do this, but it's a really cheap way of getting rid of some excess ores into something that is always going to be used. And if I open up the market panel here and actually have a look, we can come out and there's some of the other blueprints. So we can have a look at something like Titanium Sabo. Let's see that, view in industry. There we are. That's Titanium Sabo is the one that I was looking at. So let's have a look instead at the Fusion S. There we go, that's a different one. Instead of Mexilon this time, it's using Isogen, and Pyrite is a lot lower, but we're using a lot of extra Tritanium for this one. So you can see it's just a way to use up some excess of your minerals to make some ammunition, and it's something that is pretty much dedicated to sell. If I close down the blueprints and instead actually have a look here, so let's have a look. Projectile ammo, cannon ammo basically. We're going to go for standard ammo, and we're going to go for small. If I wanted to get some, say, carbonized lead, oh look at that. People are selling this by the thousands in all systems around. Like, this is not a rare thing to have because everyone freaking needs it. It's something that industrialists can make, they can put onto the market ridiculously cheap, and it will always sell because people always need it. Now, this means that when we talk about how do you actually apply this to EVE Echoes, because, yeah, some people have suggested that, oh, this should be like scripts. Now, I'm not going to do a whole thing on how scripts work, but basically, you kind of it'd be ammunition, but without the charges. You kind of put it onto your weapon, so if you've got 3 turrets, you put in 3 ammo, and then it's just permanent. It would just be a permanent thing that gives you those benefits and negatives as per the ammunition until either you change it or until your ship is destroyed. So kind of like rigs. To me, that's not particularly exciting. The ability to change your ammunition in space is something that I've always really liked. That versatility of build options is something I've really liked. And to me, that kind of gets rid of the whole actually having to stock up on this, because you just buy it once, and then when you lose your ship, you just buy it once again. You don't have to think about how much you actually need. I like the fact that I have to work out how much Titanium Sabo I actually need to have in the cargo hold of my ship. How much of this do I need to carry with me? Do I need to carry 3,000, or would I get away with 1,000 just for the missions that I'm doing? So I quite like that, because having the number as well means you stockpile some of this, which means you buy from industrialists, which helps industry. You know, that's kind of the point we're getting at here. If we go for the script option, well, it's nice that you don't have to worry about having cargo space taken up by ammo, but it doesn't help industrialists as much, and it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't really feel right, and it means that basically focusing crystals are what your frequency crystals are every ammunition type in this, because that's kind of how they work, other than the fact that frequency crystals do eventually break and need to be replaced, and again, you can replace them in space whilst you're in combat even. And it's just, I don't know, I like the fact that you actually have to have a number, that it will reload, so on and so forth. The option I quite like, though, that gets rid of the whole, oh, what happens if you run out of ammunition mid-combat encounter, you need to go off and buy more. There's a part of me that just kind of says, well, yes, that's how this works, you should have checked before we left. But at the same time, I understand that that can be pretty naff. So I could almost see a system where you've got all of these different ammunitions that apply their positives and their negatives, though it's usually a net positive, to the weapon that they're applied with. On the other hand, when you run out of ammo, you just go back to the weapons as we have them currently in EVE Echoes. Basically, you have infinite standard ammo, and then all of these other additional ammo types are just things to add versatility, differences, and to improve the ammo. So if you run out, you can still keep firing, just as we currently are in-game. But whereas I've got the statistics for a C-type autocannon or whatever, I can actually improve its tracking and improve its range, and improve its damage and this kind of thing, by using these different ammunition types. That is my preferred opinion on this, that I would love to see this be something that industry can make tons of. It just sounds like hotcakes because everyone needs it, but if you run out of it, you are still capable of firing at targets. It's not just a, oh dear, your guns are empty, click, click, click. I get that. I get that sucks, and so I think you could go on a nice middle ground for those two there. Now, ultimately, some people would then ask, but what are the chances of this actually being added to EVE Echoes? And actually fairly high. I've spoken to Melos about this in the past, and the developer AMAs that were held around the Christmas period 2021 actually confirmed that ammunition is something they are interested in adding. They're just not entirely certain how they're going to do it yet. And again, my idea there would be, yes, this is absolutely something that should not be seeded on the market. It should be entirely done by industrialists. I would like to see, this is where things get slightly controversial, that the blueprints for ammunition are permanent. They are instead tied to the level of skills that are trained. So if someone is training ammunition production, for example in EVE Echoes, basic ammunition production would give you, or even split this, have, you know, basic cannon ammunition, basic laser ammo production, that kind of thing. And at the basic level, you get things like carbonized lead and titanium sabot, and once you've got like advanced 2 or whatever, you suddenly get EMP and fusion. The higher your skills, the more varieties of ammo are added to your industry panel. No blueprints are required, they are just something you know how to do based on the level of the skill trained. So heck, at basic 1 you get all of the things like carbonized lead and titanium sabot, at advanced 1 you get phased plasma fusion and EMP, and the higher you take those skills from basic 1 or advanced 1 towards basic 5, advanced 5, you're getting faster production times and, you know, less minerals and things like that required to use it. Or better yet, not less minerals, just a lower ISK to turn the oven on, which is, again, another thing to talk about in regards to industry. So yeah, the higher your skills, the better you are able to make ammunition, but also, rather than having blueprints, having just the blueprints being permanent, but locked behind the skills, I think would be a really interesting way of doing ammunition production for players. It means that they're guaranteed to have the blueprints, and they can just make spare ammunition using any minerals they have left over and lying around. For new industrialists as well, ammunition in EVE Online is one of the best ways to make money early on as a new industrialist, because it's really cheap to make. Anyone pretty much can make it. I can make it myself on my character here. I've got the skills to make basic ammunition and actually supply myself, but I just buy it off the market because it's cheap enough that I don't have to, you know, stress too hard on this. Obviously the Tech 2 variants like Tremor and Quake and Barrage and Hail do cost a bit more, but the basic stuff is pretty cheap. Now, Melos and the guys have confirmed this is something they would like to add. If it's something you think they should add, get on the EVE Echoes Discord, the community Discord, go into the suggestion channel and suggest that they add it. Don't just expect me to do this. Of course, I give all my feedback to the developers directly, I do these videos, and when people respond in the comments section, I then give that feedback to the developers. Like, I'll say, hey guys, I put out a video about ammunition, this is what I think should be done, here are people who agreed with me, here are people who agreed with me but had some interesting ideas on the side, and then here are some people who disagreed and had their own interesting ideas, and that's how I give feedback to the developers. So if you want your voice heard, that's how you can do it. Comment on the video, and of course that helps you be in with the chance of winning a month of Combo Omega every week, and get onto the official EVE Echoes Discord and add suggestions to that channel there. Anyway, folks, that's about it for today's video. It's a little bit drier than usual, but it is something I'm passionate about. I really think that ammunition would be a huge benefit to EVE Echoes, adding combat variety and build variety to combat pilots for PvE and for PvP, and for industrialists, it would be a much needed way of income for newer industrial players, and it makes an excellent side income for more sort of more set in stone industrialists, people who are, you know, more set in their ways and doing other things like building ships and that. To me, that's why I think this should be added. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. Otherwise, happy sailing and see you in New Eden.